Jessica Lange thought a fake pregnancy would keep Tyler Brooks by her side. But when he discovered the truth and walked away, her obsession turned deadly, unraveling a twisted tale of lies, betrayal, and a murder that would shake their small town forever. In the quiet, picturesque town of Maple Ridge, nestled between rolling hills and thick pine forests, life moved at a slower pace. Neighbors knew each other by name, and the biggest drama in town usually involved high school football, games or disputes over fence lines. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and trusted each other implicitly. And that's why no one ever expected anything terrible to happen, especially not the kind of story that would leave the entire community stunned. Jessica Lange was known as one of Maple Ridge's sweetest residents. At 27, she worked at Petals and Pines, the town's only flower shop, and spent her days arranging colorful bouquets and chatting with loyal customers who adored her bright smile and warm personality. She had a soft, gentle way of speaking, and there was something about her that made people feel comfortable. To those around her, she seemed like a woman who had her life together, someone content with the little joys of small-town living. Then, there was Tyler Brooks, a man of few words and fewer friends. At 29, Tyler worked as a mechanic at the local garage, where he'd built a solid reputation for being honest and dependable. With grease-stained hands and a quiet confidence, he came, off as rugged but kind, a man who could fix anything and never asked for much in return. He lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, where he spent weekends working on old motorcycles and fishing by the lake. He wasn't flashy or loud, but people respected him. And when he started dating Jessica, folks couldn't help but think they made the perfect match. The relationship seemed to blossom quickly. They were often seen together at the farmer's market or grabbing coffee at the local cafe. Jessica would bring Tyler lunch at the garage, and he'd surprise her at work with wildflowers and coffee. They appeared deeply in love, always laughing and holding hands, and soon they became the couple everyone admired. To outsiders, their relationship was like a fairy tale, sweet, steady, and uncomplicated. But what no one realized was that Jessica and Tyler's seemingly perfect romance was built on shaky ground. As the months passed, subtle changes began to surface, small things that only the closest observers might have noticed. Tyler, who once spoke excitedly about weekend getaways with Jessica, started canceling plans. He no longer posted photos of their dates on social media. He spent more time alone, returning to his old hobbies and distancing himself from shared routines. Friends assumed he was just busy or going through a phase, but the truth was far more troubling. Tyler was having doubts. He had confided in his sister, Amy, about his growing uncertainty. While he cared about Jessica, he felt things had moved too quickly. He was starting to feel trapped, like the life he was building wasn't entirely his choice. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed more attached than ever. She frequently spoke of the future, of marriage, of buying a house together, of starting a family. Tyler nodded along, unsure of how to tell her that he wasn't ready for any of it. Jessica, though intuitive and deeply emotional, was also insecure. She sensed the shift in Tyler long before he said anything. The distance, the hesitation, the lack of enthusiasm when she talked about their future. It all added up. And with each passing day, her fear of losing him grew stronger. She had invested so much in their relationship. In her mind, Tyler was her person, her safe place, the man she had built her dreams around. Losing him wasn't just heartbreaking, it was unimaginable. Then, one evening in early spring, everything changed. Jessica posted a photo on Instagram, a tiny pair of baby shoes placed carefully on a blanket with a caption that simply read, "Coming soon." The reaction was immediate. Her friends flooded the comments with congratulations. Her co-workers cried happy tears. Tyler, however, was silent. When asked about it at work the next day, he confirmed it was true. Jessica was pregnant. People assumed the news was a happy surprise. They believed it would strengthen the couple's bond. And for a while, that appeared to be the case. Tyler didn't leave. In fact, he started acting more involved. He fixed up the spare bedroom in his cabin. He attended prenatal classes with Jessica. The two of them smiled again in public, and the town buzzed with excitement over the baby on the way. Jessica walked with a newfound glow, a hand always resting protectively on her stomach. But there were whispers, too, small concerns that no one voiced too loudly. A few people noticed Jessica never mentioned her due date. She seemed vague when asked about the doctor or upcoming appointments. One of her co-workers at the flower shop, who had children of her own, found it strange that Jessica's belly didn't seem to grow. Still, in a town like Maple Ridge, people preferred not to stir trouble. They kept their suspicions to themselves, assuming everything would make sense in time. Tyler's sister, however, wasn't so sure. As a nurse at the local clinic, Amy knew what a real pregnancy looked like. When Jessica stopped by one afternoon to drop off cookies, Amy noticed how flat her stomach still was, even 5 months in. She also caught Jessica hesitating when asked about where she was getting her prenatal care. Something didn't sit right, but Amy didn't want to accuse her brother's girlfriend without proof. Jessica, meanwhile, felt the pressure building. She knew the lie was fragile. Every passing week made it harder to fake. She had bought a prosthetic belly online and began wearing looser clothes. She used old ultrasound images she found on the internet and printed them to show friends. She told people she had a high-risk pregnancy and had to switch doctors several times. And somehow, despite the obvious red flags, most people continued to believe her. Tyler, though still shaken by the pregnancy news, tried to do the right thing. He stayed supportive. He made plans for the baby. He even talked about proposing, though he didn't seem entirely sure. Deep down, a part of him still questioned everything, but without solid evidence, he tried to silence his doubts. Jessica believed she had won. She thought she had found a way to keep Tyler, to make him stay forever. But what she didn't know was that the truth had already begun unraveling, quietly, steadily, and it wouldn't be long before the lie that held her world together would shatter completely, and when it did, there would be no going back. The pregnancy became the talk of Maple Ridge. Jessica Lane was glowing, or at least that's what people said. She wore flowing dresses, soft pastel colors, and always had a hand resting gently on her stomach. She smiled more, laughed louder, and spoke about motherhood with a dreamy kind of certainty. At first glance, she looked like every expectant mother, hopeful, nervous, and deeply in love with the idea of what was to come. Tyler Brooks, meanwhile, seemed quieter than ever. He didn't talk much about the baby. He nodded politely when people congratulated him, but there was a weight behind his eyes that didn't go unnoticed by those who knew him well. Still, the town embraced the story. A baby in Maple Ridge was always cause for celebration, especially one born to a couple so admired. Friends of Jessica hosted a small baby shower at the community center. They brought onesies and diapers, filled the room with balloons and cake. Jessica opened the gifts with practiced joy, thanking each person with wide-eyed gratitude. Tyler. stood beside her, smiling stiffly, his hand on her back. It all looked perfect, but it was far from it. Behind the scenes, the cracks were widening. Jessica's lies were starting to unravel, and no matter how carefully she tried to keep the illusion intact, the truth had a way of surfacing. Her body wasn't changing the way it should have. She wore baggy sweaters and scarves, always citing the weather or saying she was cold, even in spring. She refused to let anyone touch her stomach. And though she spoke often of doctor visits, she never brought home appointment cards, sonograms, or prenatal vitamins. Tyler noticed these things. He wasn't the most emotionally expressive man, but he paid attention. He remembered how his sister had looked when she was pregnant. He knew what a real baby bump looked like, how a pregnant woman moved, what she worried about. Jessica didn't seem to worry. She avoided the hard questions, brushed off his concerns, and got defensive when he asked to come with her to appointments. At first, he told himself she was just anxious. Maybe she wanted to keep things private. Maybe she was scared something would go wrong. But the more he questioned, the less her answers made sense. He started keeping things to himself. He didn't want to accuse her outright. Not yet. But something was wrong. The final straw came one night when he found a package in the back of her closet. Inside was a silicone baby bump, still in its plastic wrapping, and a receipt from an online maternity costume store. His heart sank. He stood there in silence, staring at the fake belly, unable to move. The next day, Tyler didn't say a word to Jessica. He went to work like normal, but his mind raced. He replayed every moment of the past few months, every excuse, every time she dodged a question, every strange thing that hadn't made sense until now. He felt betrayed, but also confused. Why would she do this? Why lie? Was she trying to trap him? He needed answers. That evening, while Jessica was at the flower shop, he called the clinic she had mentioned. The receptionist was polite but firm. No patient named Jessica Lane had ever been seen there. He tried a second clinic. Same answer. The lie was confirmed. Tyler didn't confront her right away. He told his sister first. Amy had suspected something for a while, and hearing it from Tyler made everything click. She begged him to be careful. Jessica wasn't just lying, she was manipulating, calculating. Amy didn't trust what she might do if she felt backed into a corner, but Tyler wasn't ready to disappear. He felt like he needed closure. He wanted to hear it from Jessica's mouth. So he waited until the weekend. They were supposed to have dinner together, and he used the time to prepare what he was going to say. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted the truth. When the moment came, Jessica crumbled. Faced with undeniable proof and Tyler's quiet anger, she finally admitted it. There was no baby. She had never been pregnant. She had faked everything. She cried as she confessed, saying she didn't know what else to do. She had felt him slipping away, and she was terrified of losing him. She thought if she gave him a reason to stay, he would. She thought the baby would fix everything, but it didn't. It only broke what little trust remained. Tyler didn't yell. He didn't throw things or storm out. He just looked at her, his face hollow, and told her it was over. She had taken something sacred and turned it into a tool for manipulation. He couldn't forgive that. Jessica begged him to stay. She promised to get help, to be honest from now on. But Tyler was already gone in his mind. That night, he packed a bag and left. He stayed with his sister for a few days, barely speaking, just trying to make sense of it all. The betrayal had cut deep. Not just because of the lie, but because of the intention behind it. Jessica, meanwhile, began to unravel. The house felt empty without him. The future she had imagined, her picture-perfect life with Tyler and their baby, was gone. And she couldn't stop thinking about it. About what she'd lost. About how easily it had all slipped away. But she wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Tyler had told a few close friends about what happened, though he asked them to keep it quiet. In a town like Maple Ridge, rumors spread fast. But for now, the truth hadn't reached everyone. Jessica still walked the streets as if nothing had changed. She still wore the maternity clothes, still talked about preparing the nursery, still clung to the illusion that somehow she could win him back. She started sending Tyler messages, long, desperate texts full of apologies and promises. When he didn't respond, she showed up at his sister's house. Amy turned her away. That same night, Jessica called him dozens of times. No answer. The silence pushed her deeper into despair. She was losing control, and she knew it. The lie had worked for a while. It had kept Tyler close, but now that it had been exposed, she had nothing left. No baby. No relationship. No future. What Jessica didn't understand, or maybe couldn't accept, was that Tyler's silence wasn't temporary. He wasn't just angry, he was done. And once she realized that, something inside her shifted. The fear of being alone turned into something darker. Tyler had finally escaped her web of lies. But Jessica wasn't finished yet. The days that followed were quiet, at least on the surface. Tyler Brooks had returned to his cabin, and the residents of Maple Ridge assumed he and Jessica Lane had simply hit a rough patch. People whispered, of course. Some noticed the way Jessica walked around town alone, how her smile seemed more forced, how she never mentioned the baby anymore. A few people asked gently about her pregnancy, but she'd brush them off, saying she was resting more, or that the doctor had advised her to stay quiet for a while. The answers were vague, but not enough to stir real suspicion. Yet Tyler, on the other hand, had changed. He moved like a man carrying invisible weight. He didn't speak to his co-workers unless he had to, and he stopped visiting the usual spots where he and Jessica used to spend time together. He worked long hours, then went home and stayed there. The lie had shaken him to his core. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the thought that he had been so thoroughly manipulated by someone he once thought he'd marry. He had questioned his own instincts, ignored the warnings of people close to him, and now he felt like a fool. He wanted to leave Maple Ridge, start over somewhere far away. He even talked about transferring to another auto shop in a nearby town. But life in a small town has a way of trapping people. Everyone knows your story. Your face is familiar. Your past is remembered, even when you try to forget. Tyler didn't want to make a dramatic exit. He just wanted to disappear quietly, one step at a time. Jessica knew this. She felt it. She saw the distance growing wider, saw the way he avoided her at the grocery store, and didn't respond to her calls. She watched as the future she'd built in her mind turned to ash. And in her eyes, it wasn't over, because it couldn't be. She had sacrificed everything to keep Tyler, lied, deceived, planned, because she believed their love was worth it. And now he was slipping through her fingers. She began to spiral. At first, it was small things, showing up outside Tyler's cabin uninvited, leaving handwritten letters in his mailbox, sometimes sitting in her car down the road from his house, just to see if he was home. Then it became more intense. She followed him, called his work pretending to be someone else, showed up at Amy's clinic, asking if he was okay, if he'd talked about her. Amy, now openly hostile toward her, warned her to stay away. Jessica ignored her. Tyler documented everything. The texts, the appearances, the strange phone calls. He wasn't scared, just exhausted. He told friends he was thinking about getting a restraining order, but worried it would only make things worse. He wanted it to all blow over, for her to find something else to latch onto. But Jessica wasn't letting go. Her obsession had replaced her grief. In her mind, Tyler hadn't just left. He'd betrayed her, humiliated her. And the more she stewed in that thought, the darker her intentions became. It was a Tuesday morning when Tyler vanished. He had called in sick to work the day before, saying he needed a break. His boss didn't press him. But when Tyler didn't show up the next day and failed to answer any calls, concern quickly spread. Amy tried to reach him. No answer. She drove to his cabin and found the lights off, the door locked. His motorcycle was still in the driveway. That was the first red flag. Tyler never left that bike behind. Amy called the police that afternoon. A missing persons report was filed, and an officer was sent to the cabin. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed. His keys were on the kitchen table. His phone was charging in the bedroom. A bag of groceries sat untouched on the counter. It looked like Tyler had stepped out and never come back. The search began immediately. Volunteers combed the woods around the property. Drones scanned the hills. The lake was searched, but no sign of him turned up. Jessica, when contacted by police, claimed she hadn't seen him in days. She played the part of the worried ex-girlfriend, said she still loved him, said she hoped he was just hiding out and needed time alone. Her performance was convincing enough that the police let her go, at least for the moment. But Amy wasn't fooled. She told the investigators everything she knew, the fake pregnancy, the confrontation, the stalking. She handed over Tyler's messages and emails. She pointed them straight to Jessica. What had seemed like a sad breakup suddenly looked like something far more sinister. 2 days after Tyler disappeared, a hiker stumbled across something unusual in a dense patch of forest outside Maple Ridge. There, half covered by leaves and dirt, was a shallow grave. Police were called immediately. The scene was grim. A man's body lay face down, a deep wound visible on the back of his skull. The medical examiner later confirmed it. Tyler Brooks had been killed by a single powerful blow with a blunt object. The town reeled. No one wanted to believe it. Tyler was the kind of man who never caused trouble. He kept to himself, never raised his voice. And now he was dead. Jessica was arrested that same evening. Police found evidence inside her house that connected her to the crime. A muddy shovel in the garage, a set of rubber gloves stained with blood, and the most damning item of all, a handwritten journal. In it, Jessica had detailed her plan to save her relationship. Pages filled with desperate fantasies, entries about how she thought Tyler would come back if he realized how much she loved him. But toward the end, her writing changed. It grew darker, more erratic. One line read, "If I can't have him, no one will." She denied everything during questioning, claimed someone was trying to frame her, that she had nothing to do with Tyler's death. But the evidence was overwhelming. The timing, the journal, the motive, and the lie that started it all. The investigation was swift. The prosecution built a clear narrative. Jessica Lane had faked a pregnancy to keep her boyfriend. When the truth came out and he tried to leave her, she couldn't handle it. And in the grip of desperation, she made a fatal decision. The town of Maple Ridge would never be the same. People who once admired Jessica now struggled to say her name. Tyler's cabin stood empty, a grim reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. And as Jessica sat behind bars awaiting trial, she no longer spoke of the future. She had destroyed the very life she'd been so desperate to protect. And now, all that remained was silence. Jessica Lane sat alone in her cell, the fluorescent light above flickering every few minutes. The concrete walls were cold, the mattress thin and unforgiving. She had been in custody for weeks now, waiting for the trial that would determine the rest of her life. The days blurred together, marked only by mealtimes and the occasional sound of a distant door slamming shut. Her hands shook often, not from fear, but from the heavy silence of isolation. She had always been someone who thrived on attention, on being seen and heard. Now, no one looked at her. And if they did, it was only with disgust. Outside, Maple Ridge tried to move on. The town had become a ghost of itself, weighed down by tragedy. Local newspapers had devoted weeks to covering the case. "Fake pregnancy ends in murder," read one headline. "Love, lies, and the death of Tyler Brooks," read another. Everyone had a theory, everyone had an opinion. People who once smiled at Jessica in the street now crossed the road when her name came up. Her former co-workers at the flower shop gave interviews to reporters, recounting little details in hindsight that they now believed were signs of something deeper, something disturbed. Amy Brooks became the face of grief in the town. Her pain was raw, and she channeled it into action. She spoke publicly about the warning signs Tyler had ignored, urging others to listen when their instincts told them something wasn't right. She shared the story of the fake pregnancy, the stalking, the final confrontation. She was careful, though. She never turned her grief into rage. She spoke with purpose. But those closest to her knew the toll it was taking. Her brother had died alone in the woods, buried like a secret. She would never forgive that. The trial date was set quickly. The evidence was strong, and the prosecution was confident. Still, there were complications. Jessica's defense attorney argued that the case was being tried in the court of public opinion, that the town had already convicted her, that she deserved a fair chance to explain what had happened. She had never confessed to the murder. There was no video, no eyewitness. Just a journal, some bloody gloves, and a motive as old as time: rejection. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Locals filled the wooden benches, many of them wearing ribbons in Tyler's favorite color, dark green. Reporters sat near the front. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, made it clear she would not tolerate theatrics. The jury was selected quickly, and opening statements began. The prosecution laid out their story with methodical clarity. Jessica Lane had manipulated her boyfriend into staying with her by faking a pregnancy. When he discovered the lie and ended the relationship, she descended into obsession. She stalked him, harassed him, and when he made it clear he would never come back, she lured him to the woods, struck him with a heavy object, and buried his body. They presented the journal as a window into her mind, reading selected passages aloud in the courtroom. "If I can't have him, no one will." The E words echoed like a curse. Jessica sat silently through it all, her face unreadable. Her attorney painted a different picture. He admitted she had lied about the pregnancy, admitted she had followed Tyler, sent messages, even appeared at his home. But he argued that she was mentally unwell, suffering from untreated trauma, depression, and delusions. He suggested someone else could have hurt Tyler, perhaps someone who knew about the breakup and wanted to protect him. He implied that the journal was fiction, the ravings of a desperate woman, not a confession. He pleaded for understanding, not judgment. Witnesses came and went. Amy took the stand, calm but visibly shaken. She told the jury about the night Tyler found the fake baby bump, the phone calls to the clinics, the final confrontation. She described Jessica's behavior in the weeks that followed. How she refused to accept the breakup, how she escalated. She never raised her voice. Her grief spoke louder than words. An expert witness testified that the blunt force trauma to Tyler's skull was consistent with a blow from a shovel or similar tool. The blood on the gloves matched Tyler's DNA. The shovel from Jessica's garage had trace elements of his blood as well. It was, in the prosecution's words, a puzzle that only fit one way. Jessica never took the stand. Her lawyer advised against it. Instead, he tried to poke holes in the timeline, questioning the reliability of the forensic analysis, suggesting the evidence could have been planted. But the jury wasn't swayed. The pieces fit too neatly. The motive was too strong. And the IE journal spoke volumes. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments were made. The prosecution urged the jury to remember Tyler, not just how he died, but who he was. A kind man, quiet and loyal. A man who had trusted someone who didn't deserve it. The defense asked the jury to see Jessica as human. Flawed, yes, but not a monster. They reminded them that the burden of proof was high and that doubt, no matter how small, was enough. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Outside the courthouse, people waited. Some camped out on the steps, others watched live streams from their phones. When the verdict came, the air was thick with anticipation. Guilty. First-degree murder. Jessica showed no visible reaction. She blinked once, lowered her head, and that was all. The judge thanked the jury and set the sentencing date. Jessica was led out of the courtroom in silence, her future sealed. Amy cried quietly, holding a photo of Tyler in her lap. The sentence came weeks later. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called it a calculated, cold-blooded act committed out of selfishness and obsession. She said Jessica had used the idea of motherhood as a weapon, and in doing so, had robbed the world of a man who deserved far better. Back in her cell, Jessica was finally forgotten. The letters stopped coming. The reporters moved on. The town began to heal, slowly and quietly. A bench was installed near the lake, engraved with Tyler's name. People left flowers there sometimes, or sat in silence to remember. But one truth lingered in the hearts of those who followed the case. Love, when twisted by control and fear, can become something deadly. And in Maple Ridge, they would never forget what pretending to be pregnant had cost them. Jessica Lane adjusted to life in prison not through acceptance, but through denial. She clung to a version of reality that only existed in her mind. One where Tyler Brooks hadn't really been lost, one where she wasn't the villain. She kept to herself in the cell block, rarely speaking, never writing. The woman who once spun elaborate fantasies about motherhood and marriage now lived in complete silence, as if her voice had no purpose left. Her eyes were often vacant. Her routine mechanical. Wake, eat, return to her bunk, sleep, repeat. The guards barely noticed her anymore, and the other inmates didn't care who she was. Her story had made headlines for a time, but time had a way of dulling even the sharpest tragedy. Meanwhile, the town of Maple Ridge tried to breathe again, but healing came unevenly. Some residents avoided the topic altogether. Others couldn't. Stop talking about it, as if saying Tyler's name out loud might keep his memory from fading. The flower shop where Jessica once worked had changed owners. No trace of her remained there. Not her name tag, not her favorite pen, not the scrapbook she used to keep by the register. Everything connected to her had been erased. Amy Brooks continued working at the clinic, though she never fully returned to the person she had been before. The loss of her brother had carved something deep into her, a permanent ache, a sense that nothing was quite safe anymore. She poured herself into her patients, especially young women. She talked openly about manipulation and emotional abuse, hoping her story could prevent someone else from being fooled. From the outside, she looked strong. Inside, she still saw the woods, still heard the silence where her brother had been. Tyler's cabin was eventually sold to a retired couple who had no idea what had happened there. They painted the walls, replaced the furniture, and planted a new garden outside. Neighbors watched with a quiet kind of sadness. They knew the land held memories that couldn't be painted over. Despite the conviction and the mountain of evidence, some in the town still whispered. Not because they believed Jessica was innocent, but because they couldn't reconcile the girl they remembered with the woman who had committed murder. They spoke of how charming she used to be, how kind she seemed. They used words like unstable, lost, and heartbroken, as if those could explain what she had done. But none of them brought Tyler back. Months after the trial ended, a journalist from a regional true crime podcast visited Maple Ridge. She wanted to do a feature on the case, not just about the murder, but about the lie that had preceded it, the fake pregnancy that shocked even seasoned investigators. She reached out to Amy, who hesitated but agreed to speak. The interview was raw. Amy didn't sugarcoat anything. She talked about the warning signs Tyler missed, the way Jessica had woven a web of lies, and the way grief changed her. She ended the interview with a quiet statement that stuck with listeners. It wasn't the lie that killed him. It was how far she was willing to go to keep it alive. The podcast episode went viral. Listeners across the country were fascinated by the story, a small town, a love built on deception, a fake pregnancy that turned deadly. The episode painted a picture not just of a murder, but of obsession gone unchecked. Suddenly, Jessica Lane's name was everywhere again. Some debated her mental state. Others condemned her outright. But the majority were captivated by how someone could fabricate such an intimate, life-altering lie and then kill to protect it. In prison, Jessica was made aware of the episode. She didn't listen to it. But she saw her name again in the letters she began receiving, some from strangers, others from women who claimed to understand her. A few wrote of their own desperation to hold on to someone they loved, admitting they too had lied in smaller ways. Jessica never responded. She didn't write back. She didn't want connection anymore. Whatever part of her had craved attention before had been buried with Tyler. Years passed, and the case slowly became just another entry in the archive of small-town tragedies. New scandals emerged, new headlines filled the local papers. But the people of Maple Ridge remembered. Every year on the anniversary of Tyler's death, Amy organized a walk through the woods, a silent memorial. Dozens joined her, carrying candles, wearing green. They said nothing, just walked. It was their way of reclaiming the place that had once been the site of horror, of turning a space of pain into one of remembrance. Jessica never spoke to the media. She declined every interview. Even when a popular streaming network proposed a documentary offering to pay for exclusive access, she refused. Her silence became another layer of the mystery. Some said she had nothing left to say. Others believed she was still waiting for someone to understand her side. But inside those prison walls, she remained frozen in time, stuck in the moment when everything unraveled. A decade after the murder, a small plaque was added to the walking trail in the woods where Tyler had been found. It simply read, "In memory of Tyler Brooks. May the truth always come to light." Visitors left flowers there. Some didn't even know the full story. They just knew that someone had died, and that he had been loved. The tragedy became a cautionary tale, not just about deception or obsession, but about how dangerous it can be to ignore red flags. It reminded people that control can wear the mask of love. That not all heartbreak ends with tears. Some end in silence and soil. Jessica Lane faded into the background of the prison system. Inmate files were updated, new mugshots taken every few years. She aged, her hair turned gray, and her name was eventually unfamiliar to newer guards. No one visited, no one called. And as time wore on, her life became just a footnote in a story that belonged more to Tyler than to her. Because even in death, Tyler Brooks became something larger than what he had been in life. He became a reminder of the fragile line between love and control. A quiet man whose name lived on not because of what he did, but because of what was done to him. And in the town of Maple Ridge, they never let themselves forget.